Okay, let's take a little look at the Inca Empire. So, the Inca, like other empires, formed from military conquest initially. The Inca Empire only lasted about 100 years, from about 1440 to 1520. As we're going to see, just like the Aztec, they were conquered by the Spanish in the 1500s. What makes an empire, as we talked about before, is not just military conquest, but then ruling over those newly conquered territories. And as we're going to see, the Inca were extremely organized, and they focused on centralization of power, right? So fewer people making more of the decisions rather than just letting local leaders control their territories. They set up governors who were loyal to the Inca Empire and accountants and people like that to oversee the workings of the empire. What's being shown here and in the earlier picture, these are Spanish illustrations after the Inca Empire was conquered that record some of the culture of the Inca. And this is showing a mummy of an Inca emperor that's being carried by, you can see these two bears. Inca emperors were mummified, and their mummies were worshipped. In fact, in the capital city of the Inca Empire, there was a palace set up specifically for the mummies of previous emperors to be worshipped, and offerings brought before them and things like that. We talked a little bit about writing a few weeks ago, and we said that while the Inca didn't have a full-fledged writing system, they did have a system of accounting, of keeping records, and this was quipu. These were the knots on a string, and what you can see here is that an accountant of the Inca Empire is keeping track of the amount of food in the centralized food storage units, right? So what the Inca did is, rather than just call up taxes from local provinces, they actually organized the surplus in empire-run storage facilities. So this made it quite possible for them to have the storage needed and the surplus needed to construct, as we're going to see, the very large monuments. So the Inca are known even today for their building projects. Their building projects were famous. Many of the things they constructed still stand today, while the later Spanish architecture sometimes collapses due to earthquakes and things like that. Their capital city was Cuzco, and you can see in Cuzco today some of the Inca walls. They're famous for these really megalithic stone walls where if you were walking around Cuzco, on the streets of Cuzco, you took a piece of paper or your credit card or something like that, you would not be able to fit it in between the seams of the wall here. There's no mortar used. There's no cement. These are just solid blocks that fit perfectly with one another. They're carved down so they fit absolutely perfectly with the stones around them. Plus, there's also a mortise-and-tenon system. So there's a protrusion on some stones that fits into a kind of a hollow space in the other stone. So these walls almost never collapse. And it's incredible to think that, without any draft animals or anything like this was all constructed with human labor. So Cuzco was an organized city high in the Andes here. It was built to represent a puma in terms of its shape. It had water that was brought down from the mountains in canals and aqueducts, as you can see here. And here's a little bit of a closer look. We're going to see even more impressive walls just outside of Cuzco, right? But you can see just how perfectly each stone fits with the other. This is in Cuzco. This is one of the ceremonial centers, and you can see the later Spanish church on top, which uses much smaller stones and cement, and again, that sometimes collapses. So right outside Cuzco, you won't have to remember the name of this site because it's a little hard to pronounce, but it's Sacsayhuamán. Here's Cuzco right here, and you can see these three enormous walls. This was a military fortification and also a ritual center, and the walls are just incredible. So here's Cuzco again. Right outside are these walls for protection, and you can see the size of some of these stones, just enormous, and they fit absolutely perfectly with the ones around it. So some people think in order to get these stones up on top of the lower courses, they used a series of ramps, and they had earth and ramps, and then earth fill in the space, and then the earth would be removed slowly, and the stone would slowly make its way down until it fit perfectly in the stone beneath it. One of the important aspects of the Inca economy were textiles. In many ways, the Inca valued their textiles more even than their gold. And for the Inca emperor, there was a whole group of what are known as chosen women, whose job it was to weave these important textiles. The Inca emperor was so important and was, semi-divine, that he never wore the same garment more than once. Every day he would have a freshly woven garment to put on. At the end of the day, that garment was destroyed. So he never wore the same set of clothes more than once, which, again, is a real demonstration of prestige. And again, we talked about centralized storage. So we're going to show you an archaeological example of those storage facilities. So you can actually find these archaeologically, and there's the texts from later times that show how the Inca organized this, right? So centralization, we say, is a very important aspect of running a well-organized empire, and that's exactly what the Inca did. They were also very skilled at metallurgy. We saw the Moche were skilled with metals as well, and they were an earlier culture to the Inca, the first state. Right now we have empires, but they were very, very skilled at this point with working with different kinds of metals: silver, gold, bronze, and they could even take a mixture of copper, silver, and gold, as you can see here, and using different solutions, they could dissolve the outer surface so that only gold remained. And so you could have an object that wasn't solid gold, but that had a solid gold surface on it. So that was quite advanced. The Inca had an empire that was very long and narrow, stretched 2,000 miles all the way from Quito down to Santiago in Chile, right? So this is an enormous empire here, and here's the capital city, Cusco. Well, how could you keep track of everything that was going on within the empire with it stretched out so far? This was a real challenge for the Inca, because if a messenger was going to walk, let's say, 1,000 miles to get to the capital, that would take weeks or a few months to get there. And by the time the message was received, things could have changed all the way from where the messenger was coming from. So what did the Inca do? Well, they created something really incredible by today's standards, and really by any standards, and that was a whole system of roads and runners, and this is known as the Inca Trail. Right, so one aspect of the Inca Trail were roads and paths that they built all along this empire. The other aspect was that there were way stations every 2 to 5 miles along the Inca Road, so that if a message or good had to be transported, a runner from a station, there were 2 runners in each station, would run 2 to 5 miles at top speed to the next station, hand off the message or the good, and then that person would run at top speed to the next station, and so on and so on and so on. The runner who just ran would rest in the station he arrived at and then walk back to his previous station. And since there were 2 people in each station, a station was never unmanned. Because of this system, the emperor in Cusco could eat fresh fish from the ocean every day. Right? It took a matter of hours to go from the coast up to the highlands, and it only took a matter of a few days to get a message from the farthest reaches of the empire to the capital city. So this was just an incredible system. So it was the building of roads and bridges and the maintenance of these roads and bridges as well, right? And you can see some of the rope bridges stretched along here. The road system was a little bit like the Roman road system. Here you can see that they're actually building these along these sheer cliff faces in order to have people access the road. One of the most famous sites in the Inca Empire is, of course, Machu Picchu. Many people know about it today. Machu Picchu was a winter capital of the Inca Empire. It was a place where the Inca Emperor could go during the winter and run the empire from there rather than Cuzco. Right? A historian from the United States, quote unquote, discovered it in 1912. Wasn't really discovered because local people already, had known about it for years, but anyone outside of Peru didn't know about it. So he was the first to make it known to people outside of the local population. And it's an incredibly impressive city, built high in the mountains. Right, so just imagine, it's hard enough to build something like this on flat ground, but building something like this in the mountains takes incredible effort. So they had terraced fields, as you can see here, all sorts of buildings, including the ceremonial areas of Machu Picchu, and in the Andes as well. You also get evidence of some human sacrifice. And because it's high in the mountains, the preservation is very impressive. So this is the remains of a teenage girl, and you can see her featherwork and her bronze work that were buried with her. Okay, well, how did the Inca Empire collapse? Well, the last Inca emperor was named Atahuallpa, and around this time, Spanish conquistadors under Pizarro arrived in South America. And even before the conquistadors made it to the capitals of the Inca in the mountains, disease from Europeans had already spread to the local population. So even before the conquistadors arrived, the disease that they brought with them had already moved into the capitals. What Pizarro did is he took Atahualpa hostage and held him basically in his palace. Atahualpa tried to bargain with the Spanish and said that if they let him go, he would fill up a room in his palace with gold and with silver. They took him up on the offer, and he scoured the empire for all this treasure. But the Spanish were wary, though, of a rescue attempt, and so they didn't upheld their end of the bargain, and they gave Atahualpa a choice. He could be burned at the stake for being a heretic, or he could convert to Catholicism, and he would be strangled to death. And Atahualpa chose to convert because he didn't want his body burned, because Inca emperors were mummified and their mummies were worshipped. So he was garroted by the Spanish. The Inca then led a war against the Spanish, lost that war, as we know. The Spanish then conquered this whole area, ruled over it for a couple hundred years as a province of Spain. Supposedly the local population shrank from 6 million to 2 million as a result of disease and war. But the culture of the Inca is not gone. It's still very much present, not just the Inca, but the other local indigenous cultures. And within Cusco and areas of South America, you can still see rituals and dances and ceremonies that date back to the Inca. This is a ceremony called Inti Raymi, which is the worship of the sun. The sun god in the Inca language was Quechua, was known as Inti. Right? So this is where we'll leave off with South America. From Mesoamerica, we went from chiefdoms to empire to the Aztec Empire. We saw that Aztec Empire fell because of the Spanish conquistadors. In South America, we went from chiefdoms all the way up to empires as well, and we saw that the Inca Empire likewise collapsed due to Spanish conquistadors. So this will be the information for the fourth quiz, which you'll be able to take on Blackboard. It will be open note. I'm going to post a study guide, and please let me know if you have any questions on the material. The next lecture will be on ancient China, and then we're going to be talking about secondary states. Thank you.